Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, President Donald Trump and the Republicans have a real chance to deliver some level of meaningful healthcare reform for America. We'll walk through the details coming up. And a good Monday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand by checking out the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning, as always, is brought to you by the Law Group. Melissa got her team here in Wilmington. For any legal questions, problems, or concerns, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. Healthcare is a major topic, and it makes sense that it's a major topic. It's often said nobody wants to have to utilize health insurance, right? If you are in a position where you're having to go to the doctor frequently, if you're having to take advantage of your health insurance, regardless of whether you think your insurance is good or not, it's not a good position. Nobody really wants to go to the doctor. Nobody really wants to deal with insurance, deal with the medical industry. It'd be much better off if everybody was healthier and didn't have to deal with that all, throughout the year or however many times. Nobody wants to deal with healthcare, but it is a real factor in life. And it is something that in large part, the federal government, I think, has screwed up. You go back to 2010, even a little bit before that, before the ACA or Obamacare was passed into law, there had been discussions for quite a significant amount of time of essentially socializing healthcare, which is in large part what Obamacare did. Here we sit in early 2026, more than 15 years after the passage of Obamacare, and now with it in the rearview mirror, we are looking at a disastrous system that has made healthcare more expensive, less accessible, and a major, major burden on the American people. And I'm speaking now from personal experiences as somebody that gets my insurance through the open marketplace. It's a disaster. It's incredibly expensive. The insurance coverage, frankly, blows. It's not any good. It's incredibly expensive coverage, but it's unfortunately a necessity in life. And yes, you can roll the dice, you can take the gamble, you can hope that you don't get sick. Some people more risk averse than others. But the problem remains the same. The federal government decided in a pretty large manner about 15 years ago that it wasn't just going to dip its foot into healthcare, it was going to dive in head first. And we are now, unfortunately, dealing with the repercussions and the ramifications of it. Now, that obviously is pointed at Barack Obama and the Democrats at the time that brought the ACA into reality. But Republicans are not admonished of their responsibility on this as well. They have had the opportunity over the last 15 years to deal with this problem. There were votes in the 2012, 2014 to try and get rid of Obamacare. It did not happen. Republicans did not have the votes to do it. Senator McCain, who, of course, during his presidential run talked about abolishing Obamacare, was the deciding vote in allowing the system to continue. And now here we are in 2026, still having the same conversations and still discussing the same issues. And it's an issue that is, of course, incredibly complicated. You've got a lot of players in this. You've, of course, got the healthcare industry, which in itself is massive. It's one of the largest businesses in the United States. You've got the healthcare lobby, which is outside of, tangentially connected to the healthcare industry, but the lobby in itself is massive. Not only in Washington, D.C., we see it here in North Carolina. You see it in most states across the U.S. as well. It is a multi-billion-dollar business, just the lobbying side of it. Just lobbying is billions of dollars a year that are expended by these major healthcare companies and some of their, subsidiaries, if you want to call it that, to so-called provide healthcare. The whole situation is a mess. And it is something now that the Republicans have a huge opportunity to take the ball and run with it. You know, right now, Donald Trump and the Republicans who have control of Washington, D.C. You've got the president in the Oval Office. You've got Republicans, at least for the time being, controlling the Senate, controlling the House. They have a real chance right now to deliver meaningful healthcare reform in America. And that's what has to happen. Reform is the only way through this. There have been attempts, and we've seen them in the past, to try and quote unquote fix Obamacare. You've seen and heard these discussions plenty of times before. I'm not going to sit here and rehash them for you today. You've heard the discussions. You've seen the conversation. The patchwork that has been done on Obamacare has not been sufficient. And we are largely in the same situation that we have been in years past. And of course, this has all come back to fruition because of the expiring ACA subsidies that we watched at the end of last year. The government was shut down for 40 some odd days as Democrats and Republicans battled back and forth as to what to do with these expiring subsidies. They have expired. And for anybody that has had the pleasure of purchasing their insurance through the open marketplace, you've seen that reflected in your bill. In some cases, doubling, tripling, even quadrupling your monthly premiums. It's a miserable situation. And it's something that in large part could have been avoided. Right? If you went back 15 years or even 20 years to when the conversations really started and picked up some steam, this could have been avoided. The idea that the federal government would start subsidizing healthcare was a disaster from the start. And that's exactly what Obamacare is and was. That was the whole premise, that we are going to make healthcare more affordable. I put that in quotes, make it more affordable by having U.S. taxpayers, regardless of whether they take advantage of the open exchange or not, we are going to have them subsidize healthcare. And the end result in that has been one that is unfortunately highly predictable. I pulled a couple of charts and some recent studies and some spending on healthcare, and the numbers are absolutely astonishing. You go back to 2010 when Obamacare first got its start, right? When it was first passed into law, the total healthcare spending per capita was about $8,300 a year. That's what the total national healthcare expenditures was per capita, $8,300. You now look at that number now, and it is over $14,000. That jump in the span of less than 20 years, where we sit and talk about this right now. A massive jump, a huge increase. And like we see with many other industries, it's totally predictable. As you and I are well aware, the second that the federal government turns on the money spigot in any element, in any aspect, in any industry, the second the federal government starts getting involved, the second that the federal government starts subsidizing an industry or spending in an industry, this is always the same result. The costs soar. They skyrocket because the individuals that are in charge of these industries, in the case of what we're talking about today, the healthcare industry, they know that they have kind of got the government in an unwinnable situation and that it is not politically popular, which is what the excuse has been over the last 10 years, that it's not popular to make these changes. It's not popular to cut off these subsidies. This was the whole debate during the government shutdown. We talked about it here consistently. It's not a popular thing. Healthcare costs for most families is probably their second largest expense a month. If you've got your mortgage or your rent, depending on if you own or you rent, and then behind that, it is probably, for most people, their health insurance, maybe a car payment if you've got a car payment or something, but it's right up there in one of the top things that you are spending and expensing every single month. And those costs continue to rise. Those costs continue to skyrocket. And there's no indication that with the federal government's heavy involvement, that is likely to change anytime soon. And that is why we are in the mess that we are right now. That is why we are having this discussion once again in 2026. What do we do with Obamacare? What do we do with the ACA? Totally predictable, totally avoidable. So as I mentioned, the president in Donald Trump, Republicans in Congress, they have an opportunity to do something here. They have an opportunity to deliver this level of meaningful reform for the American people. And I would argue it has to be done. Not for a political reason. I think that's more of maybe a subproduct of when this is all said and done. But this absolutely needs to happen. The American people, many of them, are drowning as it relates to their healthcare costs. They see their premiums going up year after year after year, and the service declines year after year after year. This is the unfortunate reality, the monster that has been created as it relates to healthcare. And so before we get into some of the announcements from this administration over the last year, a couple of them coming out in just the last couple of weeks, I pulled some Gallup numbers on generally the view of healthcare. And to the surprise of nobody, those numbers are very underwater. This Gallup data is from late 2025, so it's obviously a couple of months old, but still, there's not been anything drastically that has changed that is likely to cause these numbers to be irrelevant or inaccurate at this point. And you can see very clearly that 51% of people, according to Gallup polling, have a very or somewhat negative view of the healthcare industry. Meanwhile, only 36% say that they either have a very or somewhat positive review. So there's a pretty big delta there between 51 and 36. That is the view of the healthcare industry. And the other interesting thing on top of this is the responsibility. This was the question that Gallup asked. Do you think it is the responsibility of the federal government to make sure all Americans have health coverage? Or is it not the responsibility of the federal government? 62% say yes, it's the federal government's responsibility. Meanwhile, only 36% say it's not. And it's funny when you look at the chart on this, immediately after the passage of Obamacare, you had this yes, the yes, it is the federal government's responsibility at lows in the 40%. Because you remember, and I know it's been almost a decade, but in the early days of Obamacare, it was a mess. People were getting heavy penalties on their taxes if they didn't have insurance through the healthcare exchange or healthcare.gov or get it provided through their employer. I mean, it was just a mess of a situation. Some of that to the credit of the federal government. Some of that was cleaned up, but most of the problem still exists. Most of the problem is still there. It's right in our face right now, and this is why this is a major opportunity for Donald Trump and this administration to finally get it right. And so over the last couple of months and more accurately over the last 2 weeks or so, we've seen the president lay out his quote unquote plan for affordability, because that's really what this comes down to. And I know that word right now, affordability, has been kind of commandeered by the left. All of a sudden, they care about affordability. They care about the price of gas. They care about the price of eggs and other goods. This is, of course, all issues that they ran away from pretty clearly during the previous administration. But now they want to talk about affordability. So the president is using a little bit of their lingo, and I think it puts them in probably a pretty miserable situation, if I'm being bluntly honest with you on this. So President Donald Trump on January the 15th, back just a couple of days ago, released his administration's new healthcare affordability plan, which, according to Trump, aims to lower prices through marketplace reforms. There's that key word again, the R word, reforms, that include price negotiations, increased competition, and greater price transparency. It is being titled the Great Healthcare Plan, and it includes actions the administration in some cases has already introduced or is currently working to implement. Now, here's the key in all of this. It has to be codified in federal law. And the runway for that, ladies and gentlemen, is incredibly short. We sit here mid to late January of 2026. We have got primaries coming up here. Early voting starts in North Carolina in less than a month. You've got a primary in early March, and then it is going to be off to the races. It's going to be an absolute sprint all the way until November, when everything will conclude and we'll see what the end result is of those midterm elections. And so what the president has proposed, what he likely will continue to propose, this stuff has to be codified in federal law. The idea that this stuff is going to be enforced through executive order or through federal regulations is not a good plan. Now, in the short term, that's a fine way to kind of kick the ball, get it rolling downhill a little bit, but it is not the final solution in all of this. It has to be codified by Congress. It has to be signed into law by President Trump. If not, I think all of the conversation we're having right now is probably largely useless. Because as soon as Democrats get control, which again could happen as soon as later this year, as soon as Democrats get control of either of the chambers, or depending on what goes on in 2028, get control back of the Oval Office, all of that will be striked away. They will go back to the ACA. They will go back to Obamacare and try and once again piecemeal this system together. And we know that, at least I feel pretty clearly in saying, we are past the point of slapping Band-Aids, duct tape, and rubber bands on the ACA. It is a broken system. It was broken from day one. Healthcare costs have absolutely exploded. The quality of your care has gone way, way down. And the only solution that we hear from many in Washington, D.C., both Democrats and Republicans, is, well, we just have to subsidize it more. We just have to dump more and more taxpayer dollars into the ACA with no jumping off point, with no eventual solution that leads to healthcare becoming affordable. It is the literal definition of a money pit. They will just continue to have to shovel money into the ACA, shovel money into Obamacare, and I guess just cross their fingers and hope that something changes. Say a hope and a prayer that magically the healthcare industry corrects itself. I will contend to you that that is not a good solution. I will contend to you that that is not a smart path moving forward because it's largely not practical. The president said in a video announcement last week, instead of putting the needs of big corporations and special interests first, our plan finally puts you first and puts more money in your pocket, as he called on Congress to pass a comprehensive health care plan. And this absolutely has to be done. Absolutely has to be done. And could end up being, if things go well with this, and we'll get into the details, there's a lot to get into. If this goes well for Donald Trump and the Republicans, it could deliver major dividends, not only for the American people, but for the Republican Party as we look at what those end results are going to be for the midterm elections. There is no question about it. If Donald Trump and the GOP is able to, quote unquote, fix the healthcare problem, they will benefit handsomely for it. There's no question in my mind that that's the case. As we continue this discussion over healthcare, the administration, outside of what the president announced on January the 15th, has already been working on some of this stuff. And you've heard a little bit about it. But of course, due to our left-wing media in the United States that would literally rather die than give the president any sort of kudos, some things have already been done. You'll be familiar with the Trump administration negotiating reduced drug prices for Medicaid patients with 15 pharmaceutical manufacturers. That is through Trump's most favored nation's prescription drug pricing plan. The plan calls for pharmaceutical manufacturers to offer their lowest prices on drugs to Medicaid customers, as well as to sell some drugs directly to U.S. patients at lower prices. It introduces any new medications into the U.S. market at the lowest available price and reinvests revenue realized from the higher drug prices in other developed nations into the U.S. economy. The policy is aimed at leveling prices between the United States and other developed nations, which have long enjoyed a price advantage over the United States. And when we talk about price advantage, we're not talking about saving a couple of cents. When you look at what some prescription drugs cost to get throughout the rest of the world, in some cases, the U.S. is like 50 times more expensive. Now, that's an extreme example, but there are plenty of prescriptions, plenty of drugs that fit that bill that are very, very expensive in the United States. And of course, the irony of a lot of this is all of the R&D is happening in the United States in large part. A lot of that R&D is happening here. A lot of the research is happening here. A lot of it is being subsidized, surprise, surprise, by the federal government. And then the U.S. consumer is paying way more for it than most of the rest of the world. And so the favored nations plan that was introduced months ago by this administration is a smart move. It is a smart move by this administration. It doesn't get the major headlines. It hasn't been talked about all that much because it paints this administration in a good light. And Democrats, for whatever reason, still own that they are the party that is for healthcare. They still, when you look at political polling, which I did in getting this show together, people still believe that the Democrats are better suited to deal with healthcare than the Republicans. And honest to God, I don't know why. I mean, you can go and look at the track record. The reason that the federal government had its longest shutdown ever in 2025 is because Obamacare ran out of money. The Democrats' plan to make healthcare more affordable, the Democrats' plan to make healthcare more accessible for the American people flopped royally. It has proven to be an unmitigated disaster. Yet, people still believe that the Democrats have their best interest in mind as it relates to healthcare, right? This is a messaging issue. This is a messaging battle now that the Republicans have to deal with. Even though many of the issues that we're talking about today all roll back to Obamacare, the ACA, and some of the work that happened in and around 2010. According to Dr. Oz, who is the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services at the federal government, he said when you reduce obesity-related complications from hypertension and diabetes and the downstream effects of that, heart attacks, kidney failure, strokes, dementia, liver issues, you actually start saving enough money to justify more investments in new medication. The president has also recently asked Congress to make the policy law with a grandfather clause for pre-existing deals made by the administration. The plan would allow more medications that are proven to be safe to dispense without a prescription, as well as reducing prices by increasing competition and avoiding the expense of consulting a doctor. So some good news there. And this goes into the next part of the president's plan, direct payments to consumers. This great healthcare plan being brought out by the administration prioritizes making federal assistance in purchasing healthcare directly available to consumers rather than channeling the funds through insurance companies. And I've got some experience with this, so let me tell you how this works. You go to healthcare.gov. If you don't have insurance through your employer or whatever your situation is, you go to healthcare.gov, you put in some of your information, social security number, all of that, and you put in your income. And once you put in your income, the plan prices start to plummet depending on what you make, right? If you make $50,000 a year, you will see a major drop in the cost of your insurance. But the way that this is working doesn't work and doesn't make sense. Because what is happening is you are buying this through healthcare.gov. Let's say the plan is supposed to be $500 a month. You say that you make $50,000 a year. That plan drops to $150 a month. So from $500 a month to $150 a month, which for you as the end consumer is a much more palatable thing to deal with, right? 500 versus 150, much more palatable. The issue is the federal government is turning around and essentially just paying that difference to insurance companies. They are just turning around and writing blank checks to these major insurance carriers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, all the rest. That is the solution, and that is why the subsidies or why people saw their insurance premiums skyrocket in the new year in 2026 as open enrollment just ended. The reason those costs went up is because the federal government is no longer subsidizing in the way in which they were. And that is completely different, again, from what the Affordable Care Act does right now. It operates currently by providing tax credits to consumers, which are paid directly to the health insurers. And as you've heard from President Trump and as you've heard from the Republicans, they've argued that the practice is both inflationary and a potential source for fraud, with Democrats, of course, suggesting the only solution is to continue to shovel money into this pile that is known as Obamacare. The president wants to give money to the consumers to pay for the insurance versus just giving the money to the health insurance industry. And think about why that's relevant. Think about the major difference there. And you might say, well, Nick, the money's still there. Yes, it is. But we have seen in a litany of industries, talking about healthcare today, but in a whole wide swath of industries, when the federal government starts subsidizing, when the federal government starts writing blank checks, what happens? Every single time, the costs skyrocket because these healthcare companies know that they can continue to raise premiums, continue to lower the quality of care, and that the federal government will continue to write the checks because there's really not a whole hell of a lot of competition. Yes, there are some plans available on healthcare.gov, but as, again, somebody that uses this, somebody that is fortunate enough to take advantage of the open enrollment period, somebody that gets to take advantage of the aptly named Affordable Care Act, there's really not a whole lot in terms of competition. You've got like one or two cheap plans and everything else is thousands of dollars a month. It's just not a good solution. It's not a good system. And these insurance companies with these big federal subsidies, what is their incentive to lower prices? What has their incentive been over the last 15 years to make care more affordable, more accessible, and better for the American people? The answer is there is none, because federal government has been there every single time, rubber stamping checks every single year. So there's been no incentive. There's been no reason for these carriers to provide high quality, affordable care. That's just, they're not interested in it, and they don't have to be, because they know that federal government is always going to be there and is always going to hold their hand. This is why from the get-go, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was never going to work. And as I talked about earlier, we saw, and you can very clearly see in charts, the skyrocketing price of healthcare over the last 15 years. And that just happens to correlate exactly with the introduction of Obamacare. President Trump says, we're not going to just write blank checks to the insurance company. We'll give you, American consumer, you, American individual who's looking for insurance, we'll just give you the money directly. Then you get to decide what you want to do with it. And I would argue that is a much better plan going forward. It puts more money in the pockets of American consumers. It hopefully will lower prices as it relates to insurance that is provided, and it will give the American people the money to spend and decide how they want to best go about this. Again, instead of these blank checks to the insurance industry. We'll get to some of your comments coming up as we continue live on this Monday morning. Your comments on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. We'll get into those coming up here in just a couple of minutes as we continue the conversation. But before that, I want to thank the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show and remind you that when legal challenges arise, trust the Law Group here in Wilmington. Melissa Gott and her team since 2003 have experienced attorneys that have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of our state. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, if so, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. The Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show and allowing me, as we have just crossed Friday, completely missed it, the 1 year mark of the Nick Craig Show streaming live here weekday mornings across southeastern North Carolina. I can say pretty clearly that without Melissa and her team and their continued financial support, a very strong likelihood I would not be here this morning. So thanks to them for their continued support. Any legal challenges, lawgroupnc.com. We'll continue the healthcare discussion coming up here in just a few minutes as the Nick Craig Show rolls on this MLK Monday, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Monday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. We've got a lot that we are continuing this morning as we continue the healthcare discussion. You can get access to daily show notes and more. I've got all of these various studies that I brought up, the Gallup polling, some studies and research from KFF as well. All of that available over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. You can support the show there, get access to daily show notes and more. All of that, patreon.com/Nick Craig. So we're continuing the discussion on healthcare. It's a mess right now. We've gone through the litany of why we're in this position, how did we get here? And now the question is, where do we go? And, it's easy to sit here and complain. It's easy, and we've seen, unfortunately, Republicans do this for the last decade plus, constantly talking about Obamacare is broken, the ACA is broken. Yet when the rubber meets the road, very little is done. When they have the ability to do something, we've seen, unfortunately, in the past, they didn't do it. I mean, you can go back to the first Trump administration. From 2016 to 2018, Trump was in the Oval Office. Republicans controlled both chambers of Congress, and they didn't do anything. And that was a major mistake by the first Trump administration. I think the president sees the polling on this stuff. I think the people surrounding him understand the situation that exists right now, and they know that they have to do something about it. And so before we get back to what the president's plan is, we've got some comments coming in on the show. One of them is talking about pharmacy benefit managers, which is an interesting point. The comment reads, eliminate pharmacy benefit managers, the middlemen who mark up prices between insurance companies and patients. And that goes immediately into one of the president's plans with this, which is called price transparency. This plan, introduced by the president back on the 15th, would compel health insurers to provide more information to consumers by adopting a, quote, plain English insurance standard, end quote, which would communicate rates and coverage comparisons in more basic and simple terms, which is absolutely not happening right now. Under the Trump plan, insurers would be required to publish information on their websites on percentages of revenues paid out in claims, the percentage of claims denied, and the average wait time for routine care. Healthcare providers who accept Medicare or Medicaid would be required to prominently post their pricing and fees in their offices for patients to see, increase transparency, lower prices by affecting the shopping choices of individuals and also employers who are the largest purchasers of health coverage, says the White House. With the White House spokesperson saying large employers are very, very desperate to get clear information on how they can negotiate better prices. They have perhaps the best incentives within this system. The first Trump administration instituted a 2019 requirement that hospitals disclose their prices to the public. However, enforcement and compliance was rather limited, again, because this was through executive order, and it's why this absolutely has to be codified in law. The Republicans in the House, Republicans in the Senate have to deal with this. Bruce is commenting on the show this morning. He said, should Senate Republicans force D's to talk to overcome a 60-vote requirement, as Republicans essentially do not control the Senate? That is probably going to come to a head here. And, by the way, while all of this is going on right now, coming up here at the end of this month, there very well could be another government shutdown. The big shutdown that we saw throughout last year comes to a head January the 31st, less than 2 weeks from now, unless Congress passes essentially another continuing resolution or gets these 12 bills passed, you are going to see another government shutdown. Democrats are okay with that, right? They don't care if the government shuts down again. They'll continue to fight over the broken system that is known as the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. They'll continue to fight over this. They'll continue to claim that it's those evil, gosh darn Republicans, once again, that are causing your health care to be too expensive. Meanwhile, they will completely ignore the fact that it is literally baked into the name Obamacare. Brought forward, proposed by Barack Obama, codified by Democrats in Washington, D.C. As you've already heard me say, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, it was broken from day one. And you go back and read some of the news coverage, it was a disaster at the start. The federal government spent hundreds of millions of dollars on healthcare.gov. The system did not work out of the gate. They had to spend tens, if not hundreds of more millions of dollars to get the website up and operational. Unfortunately, those issues have gone away. It only took, 15 years to get to that point, but it was doomed from the start. So I just laid out a little bit of what the president's plan is. Let's talk about the political side of this now, because I think that's where things get even more interesting. This needs to be done regardless of politics. When you talk about, the American dream, when you talk about making the American people prosperous in what they do, as you heard me mention earlier, healthcare costs for a lot of families is one of their largest expenses every month. You've got your mortgage or your rent. Maybe if you've got a couple of cars that you're paying for, then you've got some car payments. Right below that is likely insurance. Unless you work for the state or federal government and you've got relatively cheap insurance. Nevertheless, it's still something that is rather expensive. Nevertheless, it's something that does bear pretty significant costs every single month. So outside of politics, this is a good thing for the American people. And I will contend to you that regardless of whether Republicans or Democrats bring forward this plan, it's good for the American people. The difference that you see right now, the breakdown, what's pitting R's versus D's, is the way to solve this. Democrats don't have a solution to the problem. Their only solution, which again we just saw last year, was to just continue to subsidize the broken system. And they'll argue it's too big, there's too many parties involved, it's too complicated, so we're just going to continue to write big checks to healthcare providers, healthcare insurance companies, and that's our solution. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's a good plan. The system needs reform. The system needs major transformations for it to be sustainable. And that's really what this boils down to. Sustainability. You are never going to hear me say the solution to a problem is continued government involvement. The continued solution to the problem is either a federal, state, or local government dumping more and more money into a problem. That never solves it. It only exacerbates it. It only makes it worse. And eventually it hits a tipping point. And I believe that we are there right now. The tipping point has been met. These costs continue to spiral out of control, and nobody at the federal level wants to discuss the root cause of the issue, which is the insurance providers, the insurance carriers that have no financial incentive whatsoever to make healthcare affordable. They don't. Because the federal government's always patting them on the back and saying, do whatever you need to do, we'll cover the costs. And it's why you've seen those prices skyrocket. Pulling up the data again from KFF. You saw healthcare costs in the 2010s averaging about $8,000. It's over $14,000 now. It's a major increase. With that burden being felt by the majority of U.S. taxpayers, regardless of whether they're taking advantage of it at all. It's literally the definition of socialized medicine. Everybody is paying for it, regardless of whether you're taking advantage of the system and using it. There are going to be a lot of major issues that define the midterm elections. The major issues that we will see that will determine whether Republicans or Democrats are successful later this year, I will admit some of them may have not even come to fruition yet. There could be a major event, there could be a major issue that drives people to the polls that might not happen for months. I'm not oblivious to that. That's kind of how the political game works. But one thing I can say for certain is if Donald Trump and the Republicans are able to bring forth a comprehensive plan, pass it into law, and allow it to actually play out, and if it does reduce costs, provide greater transparency, and overall provide individuals with better health insurance, provide individuals with access to better health care, Republicans would have a major upper hand in the midterms. It very well could provide them with the jolt that they need to overcome the norm, the trend, which is the party that is in charge typically gets shellacked in the midterm elections. There is a lot riding on this plan. There is a lot for this administration to deal with as it relates to healthcare. It not only will make life more affordable and better, but it could also parlay into a major political win, a major political victory for Donald Trump and the GOP. It could. And it likely will. Again, because the costs are so extreme. Because the American people are trying to figure out how the hell they're going to make their monthly premiums. I don't want to get too much into my own, personal situation, but the costs are out of freaking control. My health insurance nearly doubled from what it was last year, my monthly premium. And the coverage of the care sucks. It's terrible. And I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to be, oh, woe is me. This is my own personal experience. I'm not talking about something that I have no vested interest in. I'm not talking about something that I've never seen. I mean, I'm dealing with this now every single month. And a lot of people have made the decision and the determination that it's just not worth getting health insurance, that they're just going to roll the dice. And for some, it'll work out. But if not, God forbid, you have a major medical emergency and without coverage, now you're potentially looking at tens of thousands, if not maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of medical debt. You talk about being in a miserable financial situation, owing a hospital system or a healthcare system like Novant, owing them $110,000, $120,000 for a major medical stay, major medical procedure. Talk about being in a less than ideal financial situation. That's what we're talking about. And that's not a good solution either. A comment coming in on our Rumble live chat: diet and exercise instead of pill popping that doctors prescribe. You know, that's kind of what you're hearing from people like Dr. Oz, and you're hearing similar things, even though he's not, directly related to the healthcare stuff, but RFK and a little bit from the president as well. But again, why are we in that position? Why is the solution to any problem, here's a pill to pop, here's a prescription? Because these healthcare systems, right? We're talking about the doctors now. These healthcare systems have a huge vested interest in prescribing. They're getting rich. Everybody is getting rich in this. The doctors are getting rich through their healthcare provider. They're getting rich. The insurance companies are getting rich because you're paying for this stuff. The federal taxpayer is subsidizing it. Everybody in the circle is getting rich except you and I. We're the one that we're getting screwed by the whole system. Everybody else taking a big old payday. Everybody else is loading, lining their pockets with cash. You and I, anybody that's using the system, is getting screwed. And for these healthcare providers, at the end of the day, this stuff is a business. And so there is a vested interest, unfortunately for them, to have people in their offices. There's a vested interest for insurance companies to pay things out. It means they can continue to jack up premiums, continue to jack up rates. Healthcare is a business. On our Rumble live chat, pharma spent $7 billion on television ads last year. Of course. Because there's a huge vested interest in people going to their doctor and saying, hey, I saw a commercial for X drug on television when I was watching the football game. Is that something that can work for me? All these commercials end the same after their disclaimers about how all of the side effects for their drug. Every commercial ends the same. Ask your doctor about X, whatever the drug or prescription may be. Ask your doctor about how blank can help you. Every single time. That's the goal. That's the objective. You're not feeling well. You have an issue. You go into your doctor's office and you say, hey, have you heard about blank? I saw on TV, I saw an ad on Facebook that would help me with whatever problem I'm dealing with. Doctors prescribe. They get big old payout for writing the script. And drug companies get a big old payout from the insurance company, and your premiums continue to skyrocket. It's unfortunate that that's the situation that exists, but it's a real one. And there's very little competition. It is very much a monopoly, right? There's only a few providers available, and there's really not a whole hell of a lot of competition that exists. Yeah, there's plenty of companies that provide health insurance, sure, but you go and start looking at the pricing, it's not much of an option. There's not much comparison or even price comparison in any way, shape, or form. And it typically is the much larger healthcare provider, or the insurance providers, that are able to offer the cheapest plans because they're the largest. They're getting the biggest checks from the federal government. They're getting the biggest subsidies, so they can afford to, in some aspect, offer the most affordable care, which is still not affordable, still incredibly expensive for the American people. This very well could be a major election issue for this administration. It's not going to be fun It's not going to be easy, but I don't think it needs to be. This stuff is hard. These major decisions are not cakewalks, and I would argue they shouldn't be. Tough decisions have to be made. We have a broken system. We have a setup right now that is not working and is not a winning thing for the American people. And yes, there's probably going to be a little bit of dismay. Yep, there's probably going to be some hardships in all of this. But it's got to be done. I know we're talking about healthcare, so no pun intended, but it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. Republicans have been screaming and bitching and complaining about this now for the better part of a decade. It is time to step up to the plate and make it a reality. Are you going to catch flack for it? Oh, absolutely. We already saw this during the government shutdown back a couple of months ago. We already saw the media and those on the left running to their cameras, running to their microphones to blame and point the finger at the Republicans and say, these bastards are cutting off your health insurance. You're now going to be sick and die, and it's Donald Trump's fault. It's the GOP's fault. It's John Thune. It's Mike Johnson's fault. It's not our fault at all. There's going to be criticism. I don't really care. I'm over the public optics. I'm over trying to get good headlines from the New York Times. I'm over trying to get good headlines from CNN and MSNBC. That is no way to govern. We've seen what happens when Republicans try and govern by getting praise from the left. It's always a freaking disaster. Because at the end of the day, you're never going to get credit. These individuals have no interest whatsoever in giving the Republicans credit. They never have. They never will. And, you know, you've heard me say this before. I'll mention it one more time not one more time. I'll continue to mention it as I will do right now. Donald Trump doesn't really care, and he shouldn't care, what the media outrage is on this stuff. He doesn't care, and he shouldn't. Those on the left are never going to give credit to the GOP. They're never going to give credit to the Republicans. So to hell with them. Ignore it. Move on. Do what you think is best. Do what you think that will provide support to the American people. Make America great again. That's the slogan, right? And you have make America healthy again. That stuff is a reality. But it's going to take more than a couple of executive orders to do it. Trump has got to beat the drum on Mike Johnson and John Thune to get this freaking thing done. And if it means blowing up the filibuster to do it, then so be it. We are at a pivotal time with this stuff right now. It absolutely has to be dealt with. I'm sick of hearing about it. I'm sick of the Democrats pointing the finger. I'm sick of them ignoring the issue. And at the same time, I'm sick of Republicans running scared from the issue. You guys are in charge. There's a broken system that you're looking at. Find a freaking way to fix it. I don't care what it takes. Fix it. It is not good, and it's only going to continue to snowball, escalate, and get more out of control. So we'll see again as this government shutdown battle likely will continue to take place here in the next couple of weeks as we look at that January the 31st government shutdown. We'll see if this conversation and discussion rears its ugly head again, and we'll bring you the latest right here on the Nick Craig Show. With that, I want to thank you for joining us again this morning as the Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. I want to thank the Law Group for their continued support as well. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. That's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for joining us. We're back here tomorrow morning live, 7 a.m. on all of our live channels. Don't forget, you can also check out the show 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. We'll see you next time right here on the Nick Craig Show.